Picture this. A boy sits cross-legged on frozen earth, watching his father die. The great warrior who taught him to ride, to hunt, to kill, now convulsing on a felt carpet, foam spilling from blue lips. The poison works slowly. It wants him to understand what is happening. Around the fire, the men who fed him smile with teeth stained from fermented milk. They laugh at a joke someone makes. They are in no hurry. They have waited years for this moment. The boy is 9 years old. He does not cry. He does not scream. He watches. He memorizes every face, every scar, every crooked nose and broken tooth. He counts them. 13 men. He will remember that number for the rest of his life. He breathes in the smoke from the cooking fire, the sour stench of aerug, the copper smell that seeps from his father's mouth as blood vessels burst in his throat. His mother tries to cover his eyes. He pushes her hand away. His father's final breath sounds like a horse drowning. The men finish their meal. They take the horses, they take the sheep, they take everything that makes a family worth keeping alive. Then they leave. Not quickly. There is no need to rush. A widow and her children will be dead within the week. The steppe handles such things quietly. Wolves, cold, starvation. It makes no difference which one finishes the job. The clan rides west without looking back. What the murderers do not understand, what no one on the frozen plains of Mongolia understands in this moment, is that they have just made the most catastrophic mistake in human history. They have not eliminated a threat. They have created one. The boy kneeling beside his father's corpse will grow into something the world has never seen. He will raise armies that stretch to the horizon. He will erase cities so completely that archaeologists will spend centuries searching for their bones. He will kill so many human beings, estimates range from 30 to 40 million souls, that forests will regrow on abandoned farmland, carbon levels in the atmosphere will measurably drop, and the genetic legacy of his victims will vanish from entire regions of the earth. His name, in this moment, is Temujin. He is the son of a minor chieftain from a minor clan, in a land that the great civilizations of China, Persia and Europe consider barely worth mentioning. He owns nothing. He controls no one. He is 9 years old and watching his father rot. Historians still debate whether the Tatars poisoned Yasuge deliberately or simply exploited a convenient illness. The sources conflict. What they agree on is simpler and more terrible, the boy remembered. Within 40 years, the Tatar tribe will cease to exist. Every adult male taller than the linchpin of a cartwheel will be executed. The women will be distributed as slaves. The children will be raised as Mongols, their heritage erased so completely that the name Tatar will become a ghost word, a label Europeans will later misapply to completely different peoples because the original Tatars have been scrubbed from existence. All of this begins here: a cooking fire, a felt tent, a cup of something that tastes slightly wrong. The steppe wind carries the smell of smoke and death. Somewhere in the darkness, wolves are calling to each other. The boy's mother pulls him to his feet. They have no food, they have no protection, they have no future, but the boy is already calculating. How does a 9-year-old orphan, abandoned by everyone who should protect him, become the deadliest human being who ever lived? The clan did not simply leave. They performed an execution without blood. In the world of the steppe nomads, exile was cleaner than murder. No one had to swing a sword or explain a corpse. You simply rode away. The family left behind would die of natural causes: cold, hunger, wolves, disease. The ancestors would not be offended. The spirits would not demand vengeance. It was the polite way to kill women and children. Temujin's mother, Holun, had been kidnapped from another tribe on her wedding day. His father, Yasuge, had seen her travelling with her new husband, liked the look of her, and simply took her. This was not unusual. This was how marriages worked on the steppe. What was unusual was that Holun turned out to be extraordinary, more iron than the men who captured her. When the clan abandoned them, she refused to die. The sources describe what came next in fragments. Holun gathered wild onions, dug for roots with her bare hands, caught fish in shallow streams using torn fabric as nets. She fed 7 children through a winter that should have killed them all. Temujin and his brothers learned to shoot birds with arrows carved from bone. They trapped marmots. They ate rats. They gnawed on the carcasses of animals that had frozen in snowdrifts. The cold was a living thing. It crept into the felt tent through every gap, every seam. Mornings were a test of will. Whoever moved first had to rebuild the fire from coals that might have died in the night. The boys huddled together for warmth, their breath crystallizing on the tent walls. Historians still debate whether Holan's survival was exceptional luck or exceptional skill. What the sources agree on is that her sons learned something during those years that no comfortable childhood could have taught them. The world owes you nothing. Not food, not warmth, not loyalty. Everything must be taken. The other lesson was darker. Temujin had brothers. Some were full brothers, sons of Holan. Others were half-brothers, sons of Yasuge's second wife. In times of plenty, this distinction meant nothing. In times of starvation, it meant everything. The half-brothers, Bekta and Belgute, were older and stronger. When food was caught, they ate first. When meat was divided, they took the largest portions. The logic was simple. They could enforce their will, so they did. This was not cruelty. This was survival mathematics. If someone must starve, it should be someone else. Temujin watched. He learned. He filed away the knowledge that blood relations offered no protection, that family was simply another form of competition, that the strong took from the weak and called it natural. One day, he and his full brother Khazar caught a fish. A single fish, silver and gleaming, pulled from an ice-rimmed stream. It was enough food for one person for one day. Before they could return to camp, Bekta appeared. He was bigger, he was older, he took the fish. There was no discussion, no negotiation. Bekta simply reached out, grabbed the fish and walked away. Temujin said nothing. He watched his half-brother's back disappear toward the tents. His hands were shaking, but not from cold. That night the family ate. Bekta ate. The fish was gone. Temujin lay awake in the darkness, listening to the breathing of his brothers, the distant howling of wolves, the crack of ice expanding in the frozen earth. He was thinking about mathematics, about what happened when there was not enough food for everyone, about what kind of person took from the weak and felt no shame, about what kind of person he wanted to become. The answer would come within weeks. It would involve a bow, an arrow, and a betrayal so fundamental that his own mother would curse him for it. But the decision was already made. It had been made the moment Bekta walked away with that fish. Temujin had learned the final lesson of his abandoned childhood. The only safety is power. The only loyalty is fear, and family will eat you alive if you let them. The killing was planned for a summer morning. Temujin and Khasa tracked Bekta to a hillside where he sat watching the family's few remaining horses graze. The grass was tall enough to hide their approach. The sun was warm on their backs. Birds were singing. It was by all accounts a beautiful day. Bekta saw them coming. He did not run. According to the secret history of the Mongols, the only primary source written by Mongols themselves, he simply sat there and watched his half-brothers approach with bows drawn. He understood what was about to happen. Perhaps he had expected it. Perhaps he thought they would lose their nerve. Perhaps, after years of taking what he wanted from smaller, weaker children, he had forgotten that the weak eventually grow. Temujin was 12 years old. The first arrow struck Bekta in the chest. Khasa's arrow followed a moment later, hitting him in the back as he turned. The older boy fell forward onto the grass. He did not die immediately. The arrows had missed his heart. He lay there, breathing in wet gasps, blood pooling beneath him, while his half-brothers stood over him with empty bows. Historians still debate whether Temujin felt remorse. The sources suggest something worse. He felt justified. Bekta had taken food from his family. Bekta had threatened their survival. Bekta was a problem, and problems required solutions. The logic was as clean as the steppe wind. Holan's reaction was volcanic. When her sons returned to camp, she reportedly screamed at them with a fury that echoed across the hills. She called them destroyers, shadows without companions, dogs eating their own afterbirth. She reminded them that they had no friends, no allies, no protection except each other, and now they had murdered their own blood. But she did not banish them. She did not turn them over to whatever justice might exist on the lawless steppe. She fed them that night, and the next, and the next. Because Holan understood something that her curses obscured. Her son had solved a problem. The food distribution was now more equal. The family's chances of survival had marginally improved. Bekta was gone, and they were still alive. This was the education of Genghis Khan, not in strategy or tactics, not in horsemanship or archery, but in the arithmetic of elimination. Remove the obstacle, absorb the consequences, move forward. The other half-brother, Belgutay, was spared. He bent the knee immediately, submitting to Temujin's authority completely. He would remain loyal for the rest of his life, serving his half-brother through decades of conquest. The message was clear. Those who submitted lived. Those who challenged died. It was a simple lesson. Temujin would teach it to millions. The years that followed were brutal but educational. The family scraped by, slowly rebuilding. Temujin grew taller, stronger, quieter. He developed a reputation for two things: long silences and explosive violence. Men who met him remembered his eyes, pale grey, almost colourless, watching everything and revealing nothing. At 15, he was captured by the Taichid clan, the same people who had abandoned his family years before. They placed a kangwe around his neck, a heavy wooden collar that prevented sleep and made escape nearly impossible. He was displayed in their camp as a trophy, the orphan boy who had dared to survive. He escaped. The details vary by source. Some say he hid in a river, breathing through a reed. Some say a sympathetic family risked their lives to shelter him. What all sources agree on is that he got away, returned to his family, and began planning his return. The Taichid had made the same mistake as the Tatars. They had hurt him without destroying him. They had given him another reason to remember. The Kangi left scars on his neck that he carried for life. Every time he touched them, he remembered. Every time he looked in a polished bronze mirror, he remembered. The world was a collection of debts, and Temujin was building his ledger. Berta was beautiful. That was her tragedy. She had been promised to Temujin since childhood, a political arrangement between minor clans, the kind of transaction that happened constantly on the steppe. When he finally came to claim her, he was a young man with nothing. No cattle, no warriors, no power beyond his family's name and his own burning ambition. She went with him anyway. Whether she had a choice is not recorded. The marriage was brief. Within months, the Merkits attacked. This was not random violence. It was specific revenge. Years earlier, Temujin's father had stolen Holen from a Merkit man. The Merkits had waited decades for payback. Now they took it. They came at dawn. 300 riders moving fast across the steppe. Temujin had 9 horses and even fewer fighters. There was no possibility of defense. He ran. His mother ran. His brothers ran. But the horses were not enough for everyone. Berta was left behind. The sources are vague about what happened next, and deliberately so. The Merkits took Berta back to their camp. She was given to a warrior named Chilga. She remained with him for months. Some sources say 8 months, others say nearly a year. When she was finally rescued, she was visibly pregnant. Temujin accepted her back. He accepted the child too, a boy named Jochi, meaning guest or visitor. The name was not subtle. Everyone knew what it implied. For the rest of his life, Yoshi's legitimacy would be questioned, his right to succession challenged, his very existence a reminder of his father's greatest humiliation. Historians still debate whether Temujin loved Berta or simply needed her. She would remain his primary wife, his chief advisor, the mother of his 4 legitimate heirs. But something changed after her captivity. Something hardened. The young man who had fled the Merkits with nothing was transformed into something else entirely. The rage became fuel. Temujin could not rescue Berta alone. He needed allies. He needed warriors. He needed, for the first time in his life, to build something larger than his family. So he did what desperate men do. He went begging. His first stop was Toghrul Khan, leader of the Khwarites, a powerful tribe that had once been allied with his father. Temujin brought a gift, a sable coat, black as midnight, the most valuable thing his family possessed. He knelt before Toghrul and called him father. It was calculated humiliation in exchange for military support. Toghrul agreed to help. So did Jamuka, a man Temujin had known since childhood. They had sworn blood brotherhood years before, cutting their palms and mixing their blood in the ancient ritual of Anda. They had been inseparable once. They would become inseparable again, until they became mortal enemies. But that betrayal was years away. For now, Jamuka brought 20,000 warriors. The combined force descended on the Merkits like a plague. The attack was total. The Merkit camp was overrun, their warriors scattered, their families captured. Temujin rode through the chaos screaming Berta's name. He found her in a cart, fleeing with the other captive women. She reached for him. He pulled her up onto his horse. According to the secret history, That was the moment when Temujin first tasted real power. Not the power of survival, of scraping by, of killing a half-brother over a fish. Real power. The power to raise an army. The power to destroy a tribe. The power to take back what was taken from him. It was intoxicating. The Merkits were scattered but not destroyed. Temujin wanted destruction, but Togrul and Jamuka counselled mercy. They had won. They had recovered Berta. There was no need for genocide, Temujin remembered. He always remembered. The Merkits would be destroyed eventually, years later when Temujin had the power to do it alone. He would hunt them across the steppe until their name became synonymous with annihilation. But that required patience, and Temujin was learning patience. Berta gave birth 3 months after her rescue. Temujin looked at the child, at its face that might or might not resemble his own, and made a decision. The boy would live. The boy would be his son. The doubt would never be spoken aloud, but the doubt would also never disappear. The friendship with Jamuka was the most dangerous thing Temujin ever possessed. They had been Anda, blood brothers, since childhood. They had shared a blanket, shared food, shared the sacred oath that bound two men more closely than family. On the steppe, Anda was supposed to be unbreakable. It was stronger than marriage, stronger than clan loyalty, stronger than fear. Two men who swore Anda were one soul in two bodies. For years, it seemed to work. After the Merkit campaign, Temujin and Jamuka travelled together, camped together, conquered together. They were the twin sons of the Mongol steppe, and everyone assumed they would rule it jointly. Warriors flocked to their combined banner. Smaller clans submitted without fighting. The future seemed obvious. These two men would unite the fractured tribes and build something unprecedented. Then one morning, Jamuka suggested they separate their camps. The sources frame this as a mysterious moment, full of coded language and symbolic gestures. Jamuka spoke of herding horses and sheep separately, of mountains and valleys, of things that sounded innocent but carried unmistakable weight. Temujin did not understand. He asked Berta what it meant. She told him, Jamuka is tired of sharing power. That night, while Jamuka slept, Temujin packed his camp and rode away. He took everyone who would follow, and to his shock, thousands followed. Warriors, families, entire clans that had been technically under Jamuka's authority simply got up and left. They chose the orphan with the grey eyes over the established noble with the prestigious bloodline. Historians still debate whether Jamuka engineered the split or stumbled into it. What the sources agree on is the result. The two blood brothers became the two greatest rivals the Mongol steppe had ever seen. Their war would last over a decade and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. But first, there was a coronation. In 1186, the clans that followed Temujin gathered and performed something unprecedented. They elected him Khan, not just a chief, not just a leader, but a Khan. The title was sacred. It implied divine favour, cosmic authority, the mandate of Tengri, the eternal blue sky. Temujin was given a new name to match his new status, Genghis. The oceanic, the universal, the endless, Genghis Khan. The ceremony was modest by later standards, a felt tent, some fermented milk, oaths sworn by men who smelled of horses and smoke. But the symbolism was revolutionary. The Mongols had never united behind a single leader before. They had always been fragments, cousins who fought each other as often as they fought outsiders, tribes that merged and split and merged again in endless cycles. Genghis Khan intended to end those cycles permanently. Jamuka's response was predictable. He held his own coronation. His title was Gur Khan, universal ruler, an even grander claim than Genghis's. The steppe now had two men claiming absolute authority, two armies preparing for collision, two visions of the future that could not coexist. The first battle came at a place called Dalan Baljut. Genghis Khan lost. The defeat was crushing. His army scattered. His followers fled. Jamuka captured dozens of prisoners and executed them by boiling them alive in iron cauldrons. The message was clear. Oppose me, and your death will be spectacular. Genghis Khan retreated with his remaining loyalists into the wilderness. He was back to surviving on rats and roots, back to counting his enemies and planning his revenge. The difference was that now he understood the game. Jamuka had won the battle but made a critical error. The boiling executions horrified even his own supporters. Men who had followed him for years began slipping away in the night, riding toward Genghis Khan's ragged camp, offering their swords to the man who had lost but who killed cleanly. Genghis Khan learned something essential from that defeat. Victory could be poison if you misused it. Cruelty needed to be strategic, terrifying to enemies, invisible to allies. You could boil your prisoners, or you could recruit them. One option felt satisfying. The other built empires. He chose empire. Over the following years, he rebuilt. Slowly, methodically. Every warrior who joined him was integrated into his system. Not by clan, not by tribe, but by loyalty to him personally. The old structures were being dissolved and replaced with something new. Jamuka watched and worried and waited. The final confrontation was still years away, but both men knew it was coming. Only one of them would survive. The wars that followed were not battles, they were erasures. Genghis Khan did not simply defeat his enemies, he unmade them. Clan by clan, tribe by tribe, he absorbed or annihilated every rival on the Mongolian steppe until the very concept of independent tribes became meaningless. The names that had dominated the grasslands for centuries, Tatars, Merkits, Naimans, Karits, were transformed from proud nations into administrative categories, then into footnotes, then into nothing at all. The Tatars went first. These were the people who had poisoned his father. Genghis Khan had been waiting over 20 years for this moment. When his army finally encircled the Tatar Confederation, he issued orders of a kind the steppe had never seen. Every Tatar male taller than the linchpin of a cartwheel, roughly the height of a 3-year-old child, was to be killed. No exceptions, no ransoms, no mercy. The executions took days. Mongol soldiers moved through the captured population with measuring sticks, separating the boys who would live from the men and adolescents who would die. The screaming was said to carry for miles. The bodies were left for the wolves. When it was over, the Tatar tribe existed only as a collection of orphans and women, absorbed into Mongol households, their language forbidden, their traditions erased. Historians still debate whether Genghis Khan felt satisfaction or simply efficiency. The sources suggest he viewed it as mathematics: eliminate the threat, absorb the useful resources, move forward. The Tatars had created a debt 30 years earlier. The debt was now paid. The Merkits followed, then the Naimans, then his own former patron Togrul Khan of the Kharites. This last betrayal was particularly instructive. Togrul had been like a father to Genghis Khan. Their alliance had lasted nearly 2 decades. But Togrul had sons of his own, and those sons saw Genghis Khan as a threat to their inheritance. They convinced their father to turn against his adopted son. The war was brief. The Kharites were shattered. Togrul fled and was killed by Naimans who didn't recognize him. His skull was reportedly turned into a drinking cup. Genghis Khan absorbed the Kharite warriors into his army, married Togrul's nieces and daughters to his sons, and carried on. There was no visible grief. There was no hesitation. The man who had called Togrul father simply erased his family and took his people. And here's where it gets worse. The final obstacle was Jamuka, blood brother, first ally, eternal rival. By 1206, Jamuka had been hunted across the steppe for years. His followers had deserted him. His allies had been conquered. He was captured not by Genghis Khan's soldiers but by his own men, who hoped to buy favour by delivering him in chains. Genghis Khan received the news in his tent. He summoned the men who had betrayed their lord. Then he executed them. The reasoning was brutal but logical. Men who betray their master cannot be trusted, even when the betrayal benefits you. Loyalty was the foundation of everything Genghis Khan was building. He could not reward disloyalty, even disloyalty that served him. Jamuka was brought before him. According to the secret history, the 2 men spoke privately. What they said is not recorded. What is recorded is the outcome. Jamuka asked for death, and Genghis Khan gave it to him. But he gave it gently. No boiling cauldrons, no public humiliation. Jamuka was killed without spilling blood, a mark of honour among Mongols who believed that blood carried the soul. His body was wrapped in felt and buried with respect. It was the last mercy Genghis Khan would show for a very long time. In 1206, a grand assembly of all Mongol tribes was held at the source of the Onon River. Thousands of warriors gathered beneath a white banner made of horsehair. Shamans performed rituals. Oaths were sworn. and Genghis Khan was proclaimed supreme ruler of all the peoples of the felt-walled tents. He was approximately 44 years old. He controlled perhaps 1 million people. His territory was vast but poor, endless grassland, useful for horses and sheep, worthless for agriculture or trade. The civilized world barely noticed. The Jin dynasty of northern China considered the Mongols a minor nuisance. The Khwarazmian Empire to the west had never heard of them. The great powers of the medieval world were busy with their own concerns. They would learn. The steppe was unified, the army was ready, the debts were paid. Now Genghis Khan would start collecting new ones. The Jin dynasty had made a critical error. They thought walls could stop him. Zhongdu was one of the largest cities on earth. Its walls stretched for miles, thick enough to drive carts along the top, high enough to make siege ladders a joke. Inside lived over 1 million people, merchants, scholars, bureaucrats, soldiers, the accumulated wealth of Chinese civilization. The Jin emperors looked at those walls and felt safe. Genghis Khan looked at those walls and saw a problem to be solved. The Mongols had never besieged a city before. They were horse warriors, masters of the open steppe, trained to ride and shoot and vanish into the grasslands. Walls were foreign. Artillery was foreign. The very concept of permanent buildings was foreign. When Genghis Khan's army first approached Chinese fortifications, they reportedly had no idea what to do. So they learned. The first years of the Jin campaign were an education in adaptation. Mongol armies ravaged the countryside, destroying everything outside the walls. Farms, villages, granaries, irrigation systems. They couldn't take the cities, but they could starve them. They couldn't breach the walls, but they could ensure that nothing beyond them survived. Then they started recruiting engineers. Captured Chinese soldiers who knew how to build siege weapons were given a choice: work for us or die. Most chose work. Within months, Mongol armies were deploying catapults, trebuchets, and battering rams. They learned to dig tunnels under walls, to use gunpowder explosives, to redirect rivers to flood defensive positions. The Jin had created the weapons of their own destruction. Historians still debate whether Genghis Khan understood the magnitude of what he was attempting. The Jin dynasty had ruled northern China for over a century. Their army numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Their treasury was bottomless. By any rational calculation, the Mongol invasion should have been a suicidal gesture, a steppe tantrum that would be crushed within a year. It wasn't. The Jin made the same mistake that every Mongol enemy would make. They underestimated the adaptability, the patience, and the sheer relentlessness of the force arrayed against them. They won battles and lost the war. They defended cities and watched the countryside burn. They killed Mongol soldiers and discovered that 10 more appeared for everyone who fell. Zhongdu held out for years. The siege was a nightmare of starvation, disease, and despair. Food ran out. Fuel ran out. The population began eating horses, then dogs, then rats, then each other. Bodies piled in the streets faster than they could be buried. When the city finally fell in 1215, it burned for a month. Mongol soldiers moved through the ruins, killing anyone who resisted and capturing anyone who might be useful. Craftsmen, engineers, physicians, scholars. The wealth of centuries was loaded onto carts and carried back to the steppe. Gold, silk, jade, bronze. Treasures that had never existed in Mongol imagination were suddenly theirs. An ambassador from the Khwarazmian Empire arrived during the looting. He had been sent to assess the rumours of a new power rising in the east. What he found exceeded his worst expectations. He reported, "I saw mountains of bones, soil greasy with human fat, and a pestilence so thick that my escort sickened from merely riding through. The smell of burning flesh hung over the ruins. Ash fell like snow. The great city of Zhongdu, jewel of the Jin dynasty, had become a charnel house. Genghis Khan was not satisfied. The Jin dynasty still existed. The emperor had fled south to a new capital. The war would continue for another 2 decades, but something fundamental had shifted. The Mongols had proven that walls did not protect you, that numbers did not protect you, that civilization itself did not protect you. They had taken the impossible city. They had burned it. They had walked away with its treasures, and now they were looking west. The Khwarazmian ambassador returned to his emperor with a warning. These people are different. These people cannot be stopped by conventional means. These people must be appeased or avoided, never challenged. The Emperor of Khwarazm listened carefully. Then he made exactly the wrong decision, but that catastrophe was still forming. For now, Genghis Khan had achieved something unprecedented. He had broken into China. The steppe warrior with nothing had humbled one of the greatest empires on earth. The smoke still rose from Zhongdu's ruins, the carts of treasure still rolled eastward, and somewhere in the devastation a lesson was being written in blood. This was only the beginning. The insult was calculated. The response was extinction. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to the Khwarazmian Empire, the wealthy Muslim state that stretched from the Caspian Sea to the borders of India. The caravan carried merchants, diplomats, and enough luxury goods to establish commercial relations between the Mongols and the Islamic world. It was, by the standards of the time, a gesture of peace. The governor of the border city of Otrar saw something else. He saw hundreds of foreign merchants carrying fabulous wealth. He saw an opportunity for profit. He declared the caravan to be spies, seized their goods, and executed every member of the delegation. 450 men, dead, their merchandise stolen, their bodies left to rot. Genghis Khan's response was almost diplomatic. He sent ambassadors to the Shah of Khwarazm, Muhammad II, demanding justice for the massacre. He wanted the governor handed over for punishment. He wanted acknowledgement that the killings were a crime. The Shah sent back the ambassadors' heads. Historians still debate whether Muhammad II Rulan was stupid, arrogant, or simply catastrophically misinformed about what he was dealing with. His empire was enormous, perhaps 400,000 square miles, 20 million people, some of the wealthiest cities in the world. His army was formidable, his treasury was full. He had no reason to fear a horde of illiterate horse warriors from the eastern steppe. He was about to learn. The Mongol army that crossed into Khwarazmian territory in 1219 numbered approximately 100 to 150,000 men. It was, by Mongol standards, the largest military force ever assembled. Every capable warrior in the empire had been mobilized. Every resource had been directed toward a single purpose. The Shah's mistake was about to become the most expensive error in human history. What followed was not a war. It was an apocalypse. The Mongol strategy was unlike anything the Islamic world had encountered. Instead of advancing in a single mass, Genghis Khan split his forces into multiple columns that attacked simultaneously across a front of hundreds of miles. The Khwarazmian army, designed to defend fixed positions, was utterly unprepared for this kind of warfare. They couldn't concentrate their forces because they didn't know where the main attack was coming from. The answer was everywhere. Bukhara fell first. One of the great cultural centres of the Islamic world, home to scholars and libraries and mosques of stunning beauty. Genghis Khan rode into the Friday mosque on horseback and reportedly asked, "Is this the palace of the Sultan?" When told it was the house of God, he supposedly replied, "Then tell God's servants to feed my horses." The city was emptied. Those who resisted were killed. Those who surrendered were marched out to witness their homes being systematically burned. Craftsmen were separated and sent east. Young men were conscripted as arrow fodder for the next siege. The rest were left to scatter. Samarkand followed. Then Urgench. Then Merv. Then Nishapur. The carnage at Nishapur was particularly systematic. The city had killed a Mongol general, Tokchar, son-in-law of Genghis Khan himself, during a siege. The retribution was total. According to multiple sources, the Mongols spent days executing the population. Each soldier was assigned a quota. Some accounts say 200 heads, some say 400. The heads were stacked in pyramids, sorted by gender: men, women, children. The skulls alone numbered in the hundreds of thousands. When the killing was complete, Mongol soldiers walked through the corpses, cutting open bodies to search for swallowed jewels. They found enough to make the effort worthwhile. Muhammad II fled. He ran west, then north, then west again, always one step ahead of Mongol pursuit columns that tracked him across half his empire. He died on an island in the Caspian Sea, shivering with fever, stripped of everything he had ruled. His son Jalal ad-Din fought on, conducting a brilliant guerrilla campaign that inflicted the first defeats Genghis Khan had suffered in years. But it was hopeless. The empire was gone, the cities were ash, the population was dead or enslaved. Historians estimate that the Khwarazmian campaign killed between 10 and 15 million people. Some estimates go higher. The regions affected would not recover their pre-invasion population levels for centuries. In some areas, they never recovered at all. Genghis Khan had achieved something unprecedented in human history. He had erased a civilization, and he had done it because one greedy governor had killed 450 merchants. The message was clear. It would echo across continents for decades. Do not insult us, do not resist us, or this happens to you. The mathematics of death became routine. By 1221, the Mongol war machine had developed a system for processing cities. The approach was refined through repetition, optimized for efficiency, applied with bureaucratic precision. It worked like this. First, the ultimatum. Surrender immediately and your population will be spared, your leaders will be replaced, your wealth will be confiscated, but you will live. Second, the siege. If you refuse, the city will be surrounded, no food will enter, no one will leave. The clock starts. Third, the breach. When the walls fall, and they always fell, a new calculation begins. Every day of resistance multiplies the punishment. A city that surrenders after 1 week receives different treatment than a city that holds out for a month. Fourth, the sorting. The population is marched outside the walls and divided. Craftsmen, blacksmiths, engineers, weavers, metalworkers are sent east to serve Mongol industry. Young men are conscripted as hasha, human shields who will be driven ahead of the army at the next siege, absorbing arrows and filling ditches with their bodies. Women and children are distributed as spoils, the rest are killed. Fifth, the silence. The city is burned, the irrigation systems are destroyed, the fields are salted or flooded, nothing remains that could support future resistance. This was the system. This was how you murdered a civilization. Historians still debate whether Genghis Khan intended the scale of destruction that occurred, or whether his generals simply exceeded their instructions. What the sources agree on is the result. Entire regions of Central Asia were depopulated so completely that they became wilderness within a generation. The battle is over. The real tragedy is just beginning. In the city of Merv, the Mongols conducted what may have been the single largest massacre in human history up to that point. Merv had been one of the great oases of the Silk Road, a city of perhaps 400,000 people, famous for its libraries, its textiles, its position at the crossroads of trade routes that connected China to Rome. The siege lasted less than 2 weeks. When the walls were breached, the population was ordered outside. Each Mongol soldier was reportedly assigned 300 to 400 people to execute personally. The killing took days. When it was over, a Mongol officer returned to verify that the work was complete. He found groups of survivors who had hidden among the corpses playing dead. They were killed. He returned again, found more survivors. They were killed. The process repeated until no movement remained. The counting that followed produced numbers so large that historians initially dismissed them as exaggeration. 700,000 dead. Some sources claim over 1 million. Modern scholars suggest the true figure was probably between 200 and 400,000. Lower than medieval claims, but still representing the near-total extermination of one of the world's great cities. The irrigation system of Merv, which had sustained civilization in that region for over 1,000 years, was deliberately destroyed. The canals were blocked. The underground water channels were collapsed. The agricultural infrastructure that fed hundreds of thousands was erased. Merv never recovered. The ruins are still visible today. The population never returned to pre-invasion levels. The same pattern repeated across Central Asia: Nishapur, Herat, Balkh, Urgench. Names that had represented centuries of accumulated culture, learning, architecture, and human achievement, reduced to charnel houses, then to ghost towns, then to archaeological curiosities. The psychological impact was incalculable. Stories of Mongol atrocities spread ahead of the armies, travelling along trade routes and through refugee populations. Cities that had never seen a Mongol soldier became paralysed with fear. Some surrendered preemptively, sending delegations hundreds of miles to offer submission before they were even threatened. This was the point. Genghis Khan understood that terror was a weapon. Every city destroyed was a message to the next 10 cities. Resist, and this is your future. The mathematics were simple. Kill 100,000 to frighten 10 million into submission. Burn one city to save the cost of besieging 20. It was monstrous. It was also effective. By the time the Khwarazmian campaign ended, the Mongol Empire stretched from Korea to the Caspian Sea. Nothing like it had ever existed. Nothing like it would exist again until the European colonial empires of the 19th century. Genghis Khan was in his late 50s. He had achieved everything a conqueror could achieve. He had avenged every insult, paid every debt, destroyed every enemy. And yet, there was always another horizon, always another kingdom that hadn't bent the knee, always another treasury that hadn't been emptied. The killing machine required killing. The empire required expansion. Stop moving forward and the whole structure begins to collapse. So he kept moving forward, even as his body failed. Even as his sons circled each other like wolves, even as the thing he had built began slowly to devour itself. The empire was rotting from within before Genghis Khan ever died. He had 4 sons by Berta, the only wife whose children were considered legitimate heirs. 4 sons, 4 futures, and each one was a potential disaster. Yochi, the eldest, carried the stain of his mother's captivity. He might have been Genghis Khan's son. He might have been the child of a Merkit rapist. No one knew for certain, and the uncertainty was poison. When Yochi led armies, warriors whispered behind his back. When Yochi claimed honours, his brothers sneered. When Yochi demanded his inheritance, the question was always there, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Does he have the right? Chagatai, the second son, hated Yochi with a purity that bordered on religious conviction. He was the enforcer of Mongol law, the traditionalist who believed in blood purity and proper succession. To Chagatai, Yochi was an insult to his father's legacy, a bastard pretending to legitimacy. The 2 brothers could not be in the same tent without the conversation turning to violence. Ugadai, the third son, was a drunk. He was also the most politically gifted, the most charismatic, the best at managing people and building consensus. Genghis Khan saw in Ugadai the only son who might hold the empire together, but also saw the weakness that would eventually destroy him. Ugadai's alcoholism would kill him at 56, and his descendants would be purged within generations. Tolui, the youngest, was the warrior. He commanded the largest army, controlled the Mongol homeland, and held the traditional position of guardian of the family's sacred possessions. He was competent, loyal, and ultimately irrelevant. Dead before he could challenge for supreme power, possibly poisoned by rivals. 4 sons, 4 factions, 4 futures that could not coexist. Historians still debate whether Genghis Khan recognized the catastrophe taking shape among his children. The sources suggest he saw it clearly and could do nothing about it. The empire he had built required a single ruler, an undisputed Khan whose word was law. But his family was splitting into camps that would spend the next 2 centuries trying to murder each other. The confrontation came during a council to plan the succession. Chagatai openly challenged Yochi's right to inherit anything, calling him the son of a Merkit captive. Yochi lunged at his brother. Guards separated them. The founding family of the Mongol Empire was brawling like common horse thieves. Genghis Khan's solution was diplomatic but temporary. Yochi would receive the Western territories, the lands farthest from the Mongol heartland, the conquered steppes where he could rule without constant friction from his brothers. Chagatai would receive Central Asia. Ugadai would be named successor to the supreme title. Tolui would get the traditional Mongol homeland and the largest share of the army. It satisfied no one. It postponed the civil war but could not prevent it. The tragedy deepened. In 1225, Yochi stopped responding to his father's summons. Messages were sent. Yochi ignored them. Rumours reached Genghis Khan that his eldest son was hunting in his western territories, living as though his father no longer existed. To ignore a summons from Genghis Khan was rebellion. It was the one crime the empire could not tolerate. The man who had executed followers for lesser betrayals now faced an impossible choice. Destroy his own son, or destroy the principle that held his empire together. He chose empire. Genghis Khan assembled an army and began marching west. The intention was clear. He would bring Yochi to heel, by force if necessary, and demonstrate that not even blood-protected traitors. The march was unnecessary. Before the army reached Yochi's territory, messengers arrived with news. Yochi was dead. The cause was unclear. Disease, perhaps. An accident, possibly. Assassination, probably. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Someone had solved Genghis Khan's problem for him, Possibly Chagatai, possibly agents within Yoshi's own court, possibly parties unknown. Genghis Khan received the news in silence. According to some sources, he mourned privately for days. According to others, he showed no emotion at all. The truth was probably somewhere between. Grief for a son he had raised, relief that he didn't have to kill that son himself, bitterness at a situation that had no good resolution. The empire was intact, the family was broken. Within decades of Genghis Khan's death, his descendants would be waging open war against each other. The unified Mongol Empire would fracture into 4 separate khanates, each ruled by a different branch of the family, each nursing ancient grievances, each occasionally making war on the others. The man who murdered 10% of the world could not stop his own children from tearing apart everything he built, and in the end, that might have been his greatest failure. The horse threw him on a winter afternoon. Genghis Khan was 65 years old, possibly older. His exact birth date is unknown. He was hunting wild horses near the Tangut kingdom of Xixia, a state he had already conquered once and was now punishing for insufficient loyalty. The animal beneath him spooked. He fell. For a man who had spent his entire life on horseback, it was an almost impossible event. He had ridden through blizzards, across deserts, into battles where arrows flew so thick they darkened the sky. He had never fallen. He had never been unhorsed by an enemy, never lost control of a mount, never experienced this most basic humiliation of steppe life. Now he lay in the frozen grass with something broken inside him. His generals urged him to return home. The campaign could wait. The Tanguts were already defeated in all but name. There was no reason to continue, no honour to be gained, nothing left to prove. Genghis Khan refused. Historians still debate whether this was stubbornness, denial, or something darker, a death wish perhaps, or a determination to die in the field rather than in bed. The sources suggest he knew what was happening to him. He was bleeding internally. Every day he grew weaker. Every night the pain grew worse, and still he pushed forward. The Tangut campaign ground on through the winter of 1226 and into 1227. City after city fell. The population was slaughtered with the systematic brutality that had become the Mongol signature. The Tangut king sent delegations begging for mercy. Genghis Khan demanded unconditional surrender. He would not live to see it. As his condition deteriorated, he summoned his surviving sons and his most trusted generals. According to the secret history, he gave them final instructions. Finish the Tangut campaign with complete destruction. Continue the war against the Jin dynasty of China. Keep the family united. Never let internal divisions destroy what he had built. The advice about unity was either naive or ironic. His sons were already barely speaking. Chagatai had spent years undermining Ugaday's authority. Tolui commanded more soldiers than both of them combined. The civil wars were not a possibility, they were an inevitability. Genghis Khan was simply delaying them with his presence. When his presence was removed, nothing would hold. The final days are poorly documented, deliberately obscured by the secrecy that surrounded everything related to Mongol leadership. What the sources agree on is the end. Genghis Khan died in August 1227, in a tent on campaign, surrounded by guards who had been ordered to kill anyone who revealed the news. The cause of death is officially listed as injury from falling from a horse, but the truth was more complicated. The fall had happened months earlier. He had continued fighting anyway, his body breaking down around him while his will refused to acknowledge it. Some modern historians speculate about additional factors, malaria perhaps, or typhus contracted during the campaign. The Tangut region was known for disease. A weakened immune system combined with internal bleeding, combined with the relentless stress of command. Any of these could have contributed. But the simplest explanation is also the most fitting. Genghis Khan killed himself by refusing to stop. The man who had spent his entire life in motion, who had ridden from the frozen steppes to the Persian Gulf, who had never stayed in one place longer than a campaign required, who had built an empire precisely because he could not stop expanding it. That man could not accept stillness, could not accept weakness, could not accept the limitations of a body that had finally reached its end. So he kept riding until riding killed him. The news of his death was suppressed for weeks. The army continued to function, the campaign continued to advance, the illusion of immortal command was maintained until the objectives were achieved. The Tangut kingdom was destroyed. The population was massacred so completely that the Tangut people essentially ceased to exist. The final orders of Genghis Khan were carried out to the letter. Then the body was carried home. According to legend, every person encountered by the funeral procession was killed to maintain secrecy. Whether this is literally true or a symbolic expression of Mongol grief, the result was the same. By the time the body reached its final resting place, a trail of corpses marked the route. The empire had lost its center. The family had lost its referee. The future had lost its direction. Everything that followed, the brief unity under Ögedei, the fragmenting civil wars, the eventual collapse, began in that moment. A horse, a fool, a stubborn old man who refused to acknowledge that even he could die. The hunt was over. The hunter was gone, and the wolves he had raised were already circling. The burial was the final secret. Genghis Khan had conquered more territory than any human being in history. He had commanded armies that stretched to the horizon. He had built an empire that would take Europeans centuries to match, and now his body was being carried across the steppe by a procession of silent horsemen, and no one would ever know where they put it. This was deliberate. Mongol tradition demanded that great leaders be buried without markers, without monuments, without any sign that could be disturbed by enemies or fortune seekers. The earth was supposed to swallow them completely. But Genghis Khan took this tradition to extremes that have never been replicated. According to the most detailed accounts, 1,000 horsemen rode over his grave until the ground was indistinguishable from the surrounding steppe. Trees were reportedly planted, rivers were supposedly diverted. Everyone who participated in the burial was killed by soldiers who were themselves killed by other soldiers in an expanding circle of silence. The location was lost within a generation, possibly sooner. 800 years later, archaeologists are still searching. They have used satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, historical analysis, local folklore, everything that modern technology can offer. They have found nothing confirmed. The grave of the most famous conqueror in human history remains as hidden as it was in August 1227. Historians still debate whether Genghis Khan wanted this obscurity, or simply received it as tradition demanded. But there is something fitting about the disappearance. The man who erased so many cities, so many peoples, so many names from human memory, that man was himself erased, swallowed by the same earth he had covered with corpses. The empire he left behind was already dying. Ögedei was confirmed as Great Khan and proved to be an effective administrator. He completed the conquest of northern China. He expanded westward into Russia and Eastern Europe. He built a capital city at Karakorum, the first permanent settlement the Mongols had ever possessed. For a brief moment, it seemed like the empire might stabilize. Then Ögedei drank himself to death in 1241, and everything collapsed. What followed was 60 years of civil war master succession disputes. Ögedei's widow ruled as regent. Ögedei's son briefly took power, then a grandson. Then Tolui's line seized control through a combination of military force and political murder. Each transition generated more factions, more grievances, more reasons for the next war. By 1260, the empire had fractured into 4 separate khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Golden Horde in Russia. They shared a common ancestor and not much else. They made war on each other as often as they made war on outsiders. The unity that Genghis Khan had spent his life building lasted exactly 1 generation beyond his death. The legacy was more complicated than the empire. Genghis Khan killed somewhere between 30 and 40 million people. The estimates vary wildly because pre-modern population records are unreliable, because the Mongol conquest destroyed the very archives that might have documented the losses, because death on this scale is genuinely difficult to count, but the scale is not in doubt. Recent genetic and environmental studies have suggested that the Mongol conquest killed roughly 10% of the world's population at the time. The carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere dropped measurably because so much agricultural land was abandoned, so many forests regrew on empty fields, so many fires stopped burning because there was no one left to light them. He changed the climate by killing people. He also built the largest land empire in human history, connected east and west through trade routes that would eventually bring the Black Death to Europe, established legal codes that influenced Central Asian governance for centuries, and created a military system that remained the template for steppe warfare until the advent of modern weaponry. Whether this makes him history's greatest villain or history's most consequential leader depends on definitions that no one can agree on. What is not disputed is the outcome. The Mongol Empire fragmented. The successor states weakened and fell. The Golden Horde crumbled under Russian expansion. The Ilkhanate dissolved into Persian successor states. The Chagatai Khanate shattered into warring factions. The Yuan dynasty was overthrown by the Ming. By 1500, nothing remained of Genghis Khan's empire except ruins, genealogies, and nightmares. The cities he destroyed took centuries to recover. Some never did. Merv is still a wasteland. Nishapur never regained its medieval glory. The irrigation systems of Central Asia were only fully rebuilt in the 20th century, under Soviet engineers who had never heard of the man who destroyed them. The empire endured for generations, the man did not. His sons killed each other's descendants, his grandsons burned each other's cities, his great-great-grandchildren died in obscurity, their connection to the world conqueror forgotten or denied, and somewhere beneath the Mongolian steppe, in a grave that has never been found, the bones of the most destructive human being who ever lived rest in perfect anonymity. No monument, no marker, no pilgrims, just earth and silence and the slow forgetting of everything he built. History remembers the conquests. It forgot the price. They built an empire. They didn't build graves, except for everyone else.